Hello, welcome to the 18th episode of HorseSpirit Arts Gallery series, The Artistic Spirit. Tonight is my pleasure to welcome artist Jim Oliver, who is a very good wood turner. You're going to have the opportunity to see Jim's working studio. You will get to see him actually, the process of him turning wood. You'll be able to see his finished products as well as ask him questions along the way. So to explain how this show works, let me introduce our producer and creative brainchild of who came up with the idea for this show, Rob Hix. Rob, will you come online with me?
Yep. Hey, Robin, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Doing good. Doing good. So episode 18, we've got 2 more before the summer break.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is going to be a fun show. See, Beverly Hunter is in. Bill Palmer is back. Welcome, Bill. And,
hey, guys.
Yep. So for those of you that have not watched the show before, we don't treat this like a one-to-many, don't talk to you and ignore you show. We treat this like a campfire. So we welcome your comments. We talk with you during the show and have fun with it. The whole goal is for you to be able to kind of see the behind the scenes of each of the artists that are represented at the gallery and see how cool they are as real people. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Oh, yeah. And make sure that you make a comment so that we'll know you're with us.
Check you out. You're doing good. All right. Have a fun show.
All right. Thank you. Well, let me tell you a couple of things about Jim. So Jim began wood turning in 2004 after he retired from the Agricultural Research Service. So he's been turning for about 13 years. But I want to tell you this because he did it after he retired, and I hope people will really take that away, that, you know, if you're an artist inside, you can always become one whenever you want to. So one thing about Jim is he's a retired chemist, so he uses that background in his artwork, and he'll be able to tell you about that in terms of stains that he uses and processes that he uses. The other thing I want to let you know is that when I was rebuilding the gallery and brought in furniture, you know, after the flood, I brought in a large mahogany table and some other pieces. Well, artwork shows really well on light gray. And I actually had to paint the mahogany table. And I thought Jim was just going to be crushed that I actually had to paint that pretty wood. So without further ado, let me introduce you to wood turner Jim Oliver.
Hi, Robin. Hi, Rob. You should have mentioned.
Hey, welcome.
You should have mentioned about that table. It was my wife who helped you paint it.
You make me laugh. You make me laugh. Well, Jim, why don't you tell people how you got into wood turning?
Well, you pretty much said it. I always liked wood, but until I retired, I really didn't have much opportunity to do anything in particular. But over those later years, I did. Visiting craft fairs, for example, and galleries, I became more and more to appreciate turned wood. And then, as you mentioned, about 2004, about 3 things happened. I retired. We built a new house here in Ellicott City, and all of a sudden we had a large basement that was essentially empty. So all of a sudden I had room that I never had before. And also about that time I met Ron Brown, and Ron, it turns out, gives private lessons in wood turning. So I took several lessons from Ron. And he also helped me purchase my first lathe, which was a package deal, included a lot of tools. I think maybe a little bit later on, Rob's going to show you a photo of the shop, and you'll see a whole row of tools. Most of those came in that initial purchase. So that's where pretty much all began.
Well, I think that without further ado, we should go and see your art studio, and you can tell the viewer what they're looking at.
Robin, I cringe when I hear someone refer to my studio. No one who's ever been in my shop has ever again called it a studio. It's the end of a basement with some tools and stuff in it. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, let's go see your basement. Okay. So what are we looking at?
Well, there's the interior of my shop, and the lathe is sort of in the center of the floor. Those are some of the tools I just mentioned, more than I actually use. There's a lot of duplication or replication there. A couple pieces of wood. They're just essentially firewood. They happen to be walnut, but I decided to use them just to demonstrate the lathe's operation, something I could do quickly and simply. And I'm not sure why Rob selected some of these things to photograph, but that's his choice.
Oh, that's pretty.
On tables outside the shop, they're just sort of sitting around their inventory, you might say.
Those are lovely.
Well, sell them, Robin.
I'm ready. Well, Jim, I will not call it an art studio anymore, but I will call it your wood turning shop. How's that sound?
That's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, how about at this point, if we go and let the viewers see the process that you use and see that video?
Okay. I explained, here's our piece of firewood, and I decided I'll just show you how to make an egg from a piece of firewood. It demonstrates the operation of a lathe and how wood can be shaped on the lathe. This is a very simple thing, but I was going to point out a major difference between wood turning and other types of woodworking operations. If you're going to, say, cut a piece of wood or drill into a piece of wood or even sand a piece of wood, you tend to secure the wood and move a tool into it or over the surface of it using a certain amount of force and or speed. With the lathe, it's sort of the opposite. You mount the wood onto the machine. The machine turns the wood at a very high rate, and the tool is essentially stationary. So the wood turns into the tool instead of the tool being forced into the wood. It's quite a significant difference. Another outcome, if you like, maybe I should tell you what I'm doing here. As I said, I'm going to make an egg, and I'm just sort of defining the dimensions of the egg. I found that a typical chicken egg has a length about 1 1/3 times its maximum diameter, and the maximum diameter occurs at 6/10 of the way from the small end to the larger end. So using those two figures, you can make an egg of any size that's proportional to a typical chicken egg. And so now I'm shaping the smaller end of the egg. And the thing I was going to mention, which is becoming obvious, things produced on a lathe because of the rotation tend to come out with an axis of symmetry. So instead of rectangular or odd-shaped pieces, you tend to get pieces that are relatively symmetrical, at least on a couple dimensions. Notice I put on a face shield to do this, and that's fairly important for all operations other than maybe the most minor ones like sanding. I sometimes take it off. And I can't see it very well, but I think I'm about ready to part off the smaller end of the egg, yes. So now it's supported by just one end, and I'm just touching up the smaller end a little bit and sanding it a bit while it's still on the lathe. Now I'm getting ready to part off the opposite end. And I take it down to quite a small diameter and then use a saw to complete the cut.
Wow.
And then beside it, I just brought along for demonstration purposes an egg I made earlier, but the difference between this egg is that it has a magnet in the end of it and a magnet on that little stand, so I can make it stand upright.
Oh, that's great. And did you build a stand as well, Jim?
Yes.
That's great. Well, Rob, do our viewers have any questions for Jim at this point?
Let me wait for my dog to stop barking.
I can't hear you.
Maybe that was a question.
Yeah, he's trying to ask. Okay, so Rob he can't talk to us right now because his dog is going wild. So Rob, how about if you bring up some pictures of Jim's work, and Jim, you can tell us all about each individual picture. Here you go.
Oh, that's an egg I made recently from a Banksia pod. Now, if you've been in the gallery, you've seen the wonderful things that Alan Alexopoulos has made from Banksia pod. Beautiful vases and structures. Recently, I saw on the internet that someone had filled some, some of the holes in a Banksia pod. And I thought, well, that would lend itself well to an egg. So here's a sort of a typical egg, but I filled the holes with a mixture of epoxy and crushed lapis lazuli.
Wow, that is really pretty.
Yeah, I told you I'm going to go to competition with Wendy now.
Nice. So Wendy is she decorates real eggs. And so she and Jim are friends. So that's very funny.
There in fact, is a picture of my wife's collection of pisanki, which are typical Ukrainian Easter eggs. But that box, in addition to the more authentic ones, also contains at least 3 of Wendy's, I believe. We really like the fact that Wendy is experimenting with new designs, going off in different directions. And we like very much the work she's doing.
That's great.
All right. I think Robin mentioned stains as one of the things I like to do. Here are 3 pieces, all Osage orange. The piece on the right is sort of the typical color of Osage orange when it's fairly new. It's a yellow color. I have found that exposure to ammonia vapor for anywhere from 3 to 7 days really enriches, it darkens and enriches that color to something I like better. And so the 2 examples beside it are pieces that have been stained with ammonia.
Wow. Your work is just beautiful, Jim.
Thank you. These are 2 that were decorated by insects. You've probably heard of the emerald ash borer, which has become quite a pest. There's another ash borer that's been around for much longer and isn't nearly as famous. It, in fact, lives in the ground, I believe, and it attacks dead wood instead of live wood. Anyway, years ago, I had a piece of ash lying on the ground, and I turned a few things from it, but it was full of tunnels. And this gets a bit labor intensive because they're not open, empty tunnels. They're tunnels filled with essentially powdered sawdust. But I dug them out and continued with finishing the wood. So it is insect decorated wood.
Nice. Well, can you also tell us, Jim, about what happens to box elder, where you get the red?
I guess we didn't get a picture of box elder in there, did we, Rob? Okay. What happens to box elder? Box elder is a weed tree that grows very commonly around here. It's a light colored wood, but very frequently it assumes red, sometimes they're called flames, red splashes of pigment. And the tree produces this pigment in response to an insult of some kind. It could be an insect, it could be a fungus. Probably, I'm fairly certain if you drove a nail into the tree, it would produce a pigment in response. And there are a couple examples in the shop, 2 or 3 at least, and people really like that contrast between the very white wood and the red decoration, which is totally spontaneous, done by the tree.
Well, it's really beautiful. Rob, do we have questions for Jim?
So Beverly wants to know, she says, are the plates okay for food after ammonia vapor exposure? And Bill Palmer says, what has been your most challenging project?
Okay, the first one is an easy one. Well, I'm satisfied that they're safe. You can no longer smell ammonia after it's been out of the chamber for even part of a day. You no longer can smell ammonia. Ammonia has an extremely low odor threshold, so if there's any of it around, you're going to know it. And in addition, every piece that I sell or put in the gallery has had at least 6 coats of a finish and sometimes more. So everything is well sealed within the wood. And we routinely use pieces for salads, for cookies, cakes, nuts, whatever.
Wonderful. What was your second question, Rob?
Challenge. That's a tougher one. The challenge I have sometimes is having too much wood. People give me wood or I acquire it. And I find that there's a pressure to utilize it while it's still usable. And sometimes I don't take as much care in what I'm making as if I only had a limited amount of wood and I had to take extra care with it. Can you, my wife just handed me a box elder bowl to illustrate
perfect.
The color of box elder and the contrast between the white and the red.
That is beautiful. All right, you want to show us some more pictures?
Sure.
Rob?
That's a very old one I really enjoy. That is Osage orange also. And maybe because of the reflection, it's hard to see, but there are 2 blue streaks running down the surface of that bowl. And that was uncovered while I was turning it. It wasn't evident from the outside of the wood. So I started turning it, and all of a sudden I got these 2 blue streaks. Then as I turned further, I saw a couple shiny spots in the interior and realized I was cutting through 2 nails that somebody had driven in that tree years and years ago. And the tree had responded to the nails by making that blue pigment. So I kind of curtailed the operation at that point because cutting nails is not particularly good for the gouges or other tools that you use. And I didn't take the walls quite as thin as I might otherwise have done. But nonetheless, I really enjoy those 2 blue streaks that came from somebody's nails.
It's very cool.
That's a piece. That's a piece of red elm burl. Red elm is sometimes known as slippery elm. And this is a piece I actually had to purchase. It wasn't given to me, but that's one of the larger bowls that I have made. I believe that blank, when I first started, weighed something like 64 or 68 pounds. That's what I put on the lathe initially.
Wow.
And in fact, I sort of centered and balanced that. And then I took it down to Chuck Aaron's. He used a coring apparatus, which allowed him to cut 2 additional blanks out of the interior of that bowl. Instead of discarding everything as wood chips, he actually was able to make 2 additional pieces from the interior of that larger bowl.
Wow. And just for our viewer, Chuck Aaron is another wood turner in the gallery.
That's a piece of the same wood, the red elm burl or slippery elm burl. Burls are wonderful. Every wood turner loves them. I've heard the term undifferentiated growth to describe that type of process. Instead of having straight grain like oak or ash or what have you, the wood seems to grow in every direction. And you see burls as large lumps on the sides of trees sometimes. And because there are fewer occasions to crack, for example, they handle quite well on the lathe and on woodworking operations. So we all love them.
Wow, that's beautiful.
That is another burl, altogether different. That is poplar burl, and Robin, you either have or had one somewhat similar to that in the gallery. I can't remember if that's sold or not. But that is a platter made from a burl growing on a poplar tree.
That's fabulous.
That's an example of stain. Robin said that I used to be a chemist in a former lifetime, and I enjoy experimenting all of the time. And this was a piece of birch that I got a number of years ago, and I stained it with copper sulfate. The fun thing about using chemical stains as opposed to dyes is that dyes are too predictable. You put on a red dye, you're going to get a red bowl, a red piece. You put on a chemical such as copper sulfate, you may get blue, you may get green, you may get tan or brown. You just never quite know until you've experimented. So I try to put aside scraps of wood when I'm working to experiment on before committing an entire piece to a given new stain. But this one, I was quite pleased with the color achieved by copper sulfate.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I think we've moved these outside because Rob wanted to get the colors in the background. But the one on the right is a good example of something I haven't talked about yet, and that is spalted wood. Spalting occurs, it's the one on my right, I guess everybody's right. The figure, the irregular patterns result from a fungal attack on the wood. This occurs by the wood, most easily by the wood just standing on the ground for a few months in the summertime. And spalting is a nice word for really the early stages of rotting. In this particular case, I took a piece of sycamore, just sort of a firewood length log, and left it on the ground with the cut side down for about 2.5 months. And then I cut into it and started processing it, and I had that degree of spalting.
It's beautiful.
The one on the left is just a piece of dogwood, another vase made from dogwood. That's a piece that's in the gallery. I don't remember the particulars too much, but it's 2 woods. Sometimes I like to take these apart and put them back together and maybe add on some wood or insert some wood. In this case, it was a single piece of ash cut in 2 with a band of purple heart in the center and then another purple heart top. That's another example of a vase of spalted wood, spalted sycamore, I believe.
Yeah, and that's in the gallery.
It's in the gallery. It could be sycamore, it could be beech, but the effect is pretty much the same.
Very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Here
That's
we
an
go.
example of, I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
No, I interrupted you. I just think this is a beautiful, beautiful bowl.
I do too. And I have to give a lot of credit to this. Here, the work is only 10 or 20% mine. I have a longtime friend and collaborator named Phil Sonnet, who lives in Pennsylvania. Unlike me, who I only do turning, Phil does all kinds of woodworking, and he's extremely good at it, but he does not own a lathe. And somehow years ago, I got him interested in segmented turning. And it may not be obvious here, but there are, at least 10 bands, each of maybe 18 or 20 pieces. So all those pieces are individually cut and glued together according to a given pattern. And then once they're all together, he sends them down to me and I put it on the lathe and finish the job. But both the design and initial measuring and construction is done by Phil Sonnet.
And that particular bowl looks the same inside as it does outside. It really is spectacular.
Yeah, I'm surprised that one hasn't sold yet.
Me too. Me too.
Okay, that's another piece of the red elm burl. Again, well, it has a big opening in it. I don't know if we'll come to an example. Sometimes if I have a fissure in wood, or if there's a crack, or if there's some blemish, I actually excavate that material and fill it with something. In this case, I think the hole is just a natural part of the wood. It sort of authenticates the piece, if you will. And I did not try to do anything to it.
What do you usually fill the holes with?
Usually epoxy mixed with something. And one of the things I use a lot is just used coffee grounds, dried coffee grounds mixed with epoxy. It gives you a nearly black fill, and it takes the polish well. And it doesn't dull the tools particularly. It's just nice to work with. But I use sawdust sometimes. I use crushed stone sometimes also, but that's harder on the tools. So there you have to rely more on sanding and other techniques to get rid of the excess material, because you always have to overfill the holes that you make and then work them down.
Being a rock hound myself, I love when you fill the holes with, lapis or real stone. It's just lovely.
I have used lapis, I've used turquoise, I've used a soapstone. I tried fool's gold once or twice, but the lapis is probably my favorite of those that I have tried.
Well, Mr. Rob is going to ask some questions from viewers.
Okay. Yep. So first, a couple comments. So Beverly Hunter says, excellent and lovely work. Bill Palmer says, does the age or the type of wood affect how it responds when you are creating the individual pieces? And Carlos says, beautiful woodwork. So I guess back to Bill's question.
On the age, no, I wouldn't say it's particularly important so long as the wood is sound. And that isn't necessarily just a function of age. It really depends on the conditions and how the wood has fared over the years. We did not get a picture, but actually I have it right up here and I'm going to show you a picture. This is a piece of mesquite that came from Arizona.
Wow.
There's a little bit of story on this. I don't know the whole thing, but apparently a man found this in the Arizona desert some 30, maybe 40 years ago. It was a very large log for mesquite. And he concluded from the size of the log, I think, that the piece must be 200 or 300 years old. So he somehow couldn't get himself to leave it there. He took it home and put it in his basement for about 30 years. Never had done anything with it. So he gave it to somebody else, a man in Catonsville named Brian Graham, who you may know. Brian cut off a chunk of it and gave it to me. And I turned it into this bowl. And I think it's a very pretty piece. Yeah. Like the Osage orange that I showed you a little while ago, that was in the pictures. It's a little bit thicker walled than I would normally shoot for. But I said at the time, I guess I'd rather have a thicker walled bowl than a box full of thin walled fragments. So I left it as it was.
It's really lovely. So Jim, let's talk about your sources of wood. Are you like one of those guys that drives down the road and if you see a tree that's down, you go get it? Or how does that work?
That is sort of how it often works, yes. A number of pieces I've made have come from trees right here in my immediate neighborhood. And there's a sort of grapevine that exists among woodturners also. You learn about some wood and you try to use some of it and also let some of your friends know. We've both already mentioned Chuck Aaron. Chuck Aaron is in the Wood Scroungers Hall of Fame. And more pieces over the years that I have done have come from wood that Chuck has somehow scrounged. I owe a lot to Chuck, some really nice stuff. And let's see, there's another man I need to acknowledge. His name is Steve Kirshner. He's a professional tree person right here in Ellicott City. And Steve sometimes puts aside a piece for me, and he has a great eye. If you see something interesting, some interesting colors, some interesting feature in wood, why he puts it aside for me. And I guess we didn't get a photo of it, but there are a couple of pieces, one even in the gallery, I think, a walnut that's been decorated by a woodpecker. And you can see the filled holes in the wood where a woodpecker originally made some holes and the tree filled them in.
Yeah, you have some beautiful pieces in the gallery.
And let's see, another person I might mention while we're on this subject is Phil Normandy from Brookside Gardens. Phil is a horticulturalist there, and he also is interested in woods. And he sometimes, if they're cutting down a tree or plant for some reason, he'll put aside wood for me. And of course, from a botanic garden, that gives me access to woods that I wouldn't otherwise ever see. So once in a while, I get something kind of interesting from Phil.
Wow, that's wonderful. You have your own little squirrel network.
We all do, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Baltimore area Turners. And so, as I said, there's a grapevine, but also every month there's a wood raffle to kind of fund our meetings. And so wood gets exchanged at these meetings as well.
Oh, that's great. I do have to tell the story of you and Chuck Aaron and Alan Exopoulos coming over to our home because my husband Max is a wood turner, and just what the whole ordeal of getting those huge pieces of wood delivered to you guys.
Yeah, I had meant to mention that another nice source of wood, it had been Max very generously split up these big burls that somebody had given to him. So he made them available to the rest of us who were in the gallery. And we've turned several pieces out of those.
Sweet, Max.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Nancy Lee Davis says, I am hoping you are coming from my dogwood tree.
I'll have to talk more with Chuck about this. I don't know too much about the tree or its history or what exactly is involved. Dogwood can be very pretty if it's a reasonable size. In fact, I think that base that we showed earlier was a dogwood, one picture taken outside.
Well, nice. Well, Jim, if we haven't already covered it, can you talk about colors of wood?
It's quite a complex subject. My friend that I mentioned, Phil Sonnet, is quite interested in the chemistry of wood pigments. I have never gone that far into it. I showed you the red pigment in box elder, the blue pigment that occurred in the Osage orange. I guess we didn't get any examples of ambrosia maple. That's still another example of an insect transmitted color. The insect is a beetle. It attacks the wood, but the insect itself isn't responsible for the color. Apparently it carries a fungus which gets into the wood, and the fungus produces a pigment which gets spread through the wood. And then of course, as you know, woods had different colors. The box elder I showed you is nearly white. Walnut that I made the egg from is very dark brown and is valued for that reason. The Osage orange was yellow. And there are all sorts of shades in between. These are natural colors. And of course, we sometimes play around to adjust the colors or amend them to suit ourselves.
Wow. Well, Jim, what would you say to somebody who wanted to just start getting into wood turning?
It's fun. It does require a little bit of equipment, but a small lathe isn't really expensive. And you saw a huge number of tools that I have, but that's because I purchased a package. You don't really need that many to get started. And so I would say if you're interested, attend one of the local turning clubs. It's free to show up and get a feeling for it. You'll meet a lot of people who are some beginners, some quite knowledgeable. The Baltimore area turners have a website. I'd suggest looking at that. The Howard County Woodworkers Guild has some turners as members. That's another place you could go to meet wood turners. And a lot of wood turners would be happy to take you to their shop and show you how it works and maybe even let you try it for yourself. And I'm willing to do that. If somebody wants to come by my house, why, they can see what I do, and if they want to try it, they can do so.
You know, actually this week, Jim, you had somebody come into the gallery who said that you had done that for him, and he came explicitly to look at your work.
Oh.
I think that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, Jim, is there anything else you want to share with the viewer about wood turning?
How about a confession?
Say again?
Confession. I'm somewhat unlike most of the artists in the gallery. The artists, like the painters, start with something totally blank, a blank sheet, a blank surface, and create something wonderful. I start with something that's already beautiful. And I just change the shape a little bit, and I hope I don't screw it up too badly in the process. But it isn't quite the same creative process as starting with nothing and making something that's fantastic.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you a little bit because you can see wood that looks dead or old or insect ridden, and then you see that, and then you can create something spectacular out of it. So I don't think that's any less than a painter with a blank canvas.
Well, we can disagree on that.
Okay, we disagree on that, Jim. I think you're a fabulous artist.
Well, thank you, Robin.
All right. Well, what else would you like? You know, we're coming to the close of the interview. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I appreciate being a member of the gallery. It's been wonderful for me. And Robin, in addition to creating a nice gallery, has also created a community. We've gotten to know each other, many of us have, and enjoy the occasional gatherings that we have. So Robin's sort of a house mother in addition to a gallery owner. And we all appreciate that.
Oh, well, you are all very important to me. And Jim, it was lovely to have you on the show. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Robin. Thank you, Rob.
All right. So this week, every week we have a business in town that we honor, but we had a little squirrely mix up. So we don't have a business for this week, but we'll have one for the next couple of weeks. I want to tell you what's going to happen next week is we have a fabulous sculptor, Dave Hardell, who's going to join us. He is one of the most down-to-earth people you could ever meet, just as kind-hearted as he can be and extremely talented. He's quite diverse. He does everything from using gears in his artwork to, he just recently sold a large piece called Nod to Matisse, which was just beautifully sculpted out of metal. So I know you'll look forward to meeting Dave and seeing his work and seeing his process. So as Rob said, we're bringing our series to a close, series 1, pretty soon. I think we have 3 more episodes. Our last episode airs the 13th of July. So hang with us for a couple more. We're going to make it all the way to 21. Tonight was 18. And I look forward to seeing you next week, which is the 29th of June at 7 o'clock. Rob, anything else to add?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.